The god of whitewashing. The child's toothbrush, little boy's toothbrush, and some teeth in the soap, some human teeth. An attorney for the last administration named John Yoo. He's the guy who made the torture memos, the infamous torture memos. He was essentially saying anything could be done. No sort of torture was illegal or out of bounds. And the human rights advocate named Doug Castle asked them, well, what if you wanted someone to talk, and so you were going to crush the testicle of the person's child? Would that be illegal? And he said, oh no.
What?
And so you can see the video of him on YouTube. All you have to do is search for John Yoo, Y-O-O, and crushing testicle. And it turns out that the government did do different kinds of torture to people's children. And one that is admitted to is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And he was in custody for many years. And at some point, the government admits to putting his children in boxes, like with insects and such. And
like coffins.
Yes. And at that point, he started talking and admitting to things. And so then they got him.
I'm sure that's all good information, too.
It turns out that it apparently is pretty good information, because he admitted to crimes that took place after he had been in prison for years. And in one instance, he admitted to bombing a building that had not been built when he was first put into custody. And so that's the kind of intelligence that they got.
Yeah.
The God of War. And I have the best story to tell about this man.
Yeah.
Because he used to he's a veteran, and that's where he got himself titanium legs, let's say Special Forces and something soldier with a skull on the legs. This isn't my creativity. This is his legs, the way they look.
Wow.
And for a long time, he would stand at the intersection of Hilladale Road and 85 at the exit off the interstate. That's the nearest exit to the Veterans Hospital, where different kinds of work would be done on him. And it's all just very accurate, the way he looks, other than the gun. He doesn't typically stand out there with a gun, though maybe he'd like to. And there's usually sort of a shrine around them with prisoner MIA flags and Special Forces flags and all this type of thing. And one day, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I stopped, and I asked him, and I don't usually do this sort of thing, because I don't usually like risking being punched in the nose or whatever, but I stopped and I asked him, and I said, how can you do this? How can you be like a military recruitment commercial, as though all this is so cool, and you're standing here at the corner, glorifying your bosses, and it's like they don't care about you. That's why you don't have legs. That Henry Kissinger said that military men are dumb animals to be used. And so I told him that. I'm like, they think that you're a dumb animal to have your legs blown off. I mean, how can you support that? And in a way, I really kind of thought that he might punch me or something. And he said, I completely agree with you. I can't tell the story without getting chills. He said, the reason that I have all this set up is to draw in military people and tell them that very message.
That's amazing.
Oh my gosh. The demon of surveillance.
Can I ask the distinction between the gods and the demons here?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, of course, one person's god is another person's demon, and then there's also, as a piece of art, it's left a little ambiguous. This is actually a U.S. Empire drone, and this is actually another U.S. Empire military robot. There are surveillance blimps over the major American cities, and so it's all, although it's not like reported in the news very often, it's you could find the contracts and all where they build them, and apparently they have just really excellent resolution to be able to recognize people on the street and that type of thing. And from a distance, you really pretty much just have the Jackson Pollock thing.
But you can see their shapes there, and what they are is bodies and body parts amidst a paint splatter. And you call this one the
God of Secret Agencies.
Yeah.
About 7 years ago, I read a book called The Cultural Cold War by Francis Stoner Saunders, and it explained how, well, Jackson Pollock was funded by the CIA, and that sort of creeped me out.
That floors me. That floors me.
Yeah.
And why was it? It was about nothingness.
Well, there was a type of art called Soviet realism, which looks a little bit like the Stalin image in the God of State. And the Soviet realism might have Stalin with little children bringing him roses and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And the idea was, well, that's kind of moving to people. That sort of realistic, figurative kind of painting. And so the people who wanted to promote a different type of state. Well, even though they were getting the same funding from the same bakers and that type of thing, but wanted to promote an alternate vision of that. They could have hired Norman Rockwell and had him paint realistic, capitalism scenes or something, but instead they decided to change the definition of art to the extent that they were able to, and they were able to for 50, 60 years in the 20th century. When to be real art, to be real contemporary, significant art, it had to not have meaning. And then when people looked at it, they would get whatever feelings they got from it, and that's the only legitimate meaning. And so that brings us to Jackson Pollock. And Jackson Pollock was sort of a working stiff artist, getting a government paycheck, making murals for the WPA, and no one had really heard of him. Just your regular kind of guy, drunk artist. And, but when he went from being an artist who no one had really ever heard of to the cover of, it was either Time or Life, and he was described on the cover as being the most significant artist of his generation. And that's when it was brought in, this whole idea of just expressionist art that didn't have meaning. And it started really being hyped. And the Congress of Cultural Freedom was a CIA-owned front. And they sponsored shows for his work and similar artists' work all over the world. It's a fairly faithful reproduction of Picasso's Guernica. And this is one of the more famous anti-war pieces of art in history, and certainly in the 20th century. Guernica was a Spanish city that was an early significant air war. So in the Picasso painting, you can see mother holding a baby, looking up to the sky, and that type of thing. Well, in 2003, the U.S. was getting ready to reinvade Iraq, and Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, was going to give a press conference at the UN and explain their intentions. And behind the podium where he was going to give the press conference, there was a big tapestry of Guernica. And so, although just a piece of art, the UN thought it was best to put a curtain over it.
This is a god of distraction.
Yeah. Interesting things that might keep people from thinking about underlying realities to the world. The god of the herd. It's we got that cruciform shape again. Now here we have U.S. Code, Title 50, Chapter 32, 1528. First couple of pages explain how, you cannot possibly experiment on people without their consent. You must have all these different levels of consent. And then the last couple sentences say, well, unless it's for public safety, unless it's for crowd control, unless it's for these other things. Turns out that soldiers, foster children have been irradiated to death in medical experiments. So it's not just, we've all heard of the Tuskegee experiments, but you look into it and it turns out that there are hundreds or thousands of those types of experiments. I went to the Fort Detrick website. I assume this is still the way it is because it was just in the last year. And they were bragging, I guess, about their successes in some of the experiments they had done, which included going back decades of putting bacteria into the New York subway to see how it would propagate through the population and that type of thing. This is on their site. So it's not even like it's just declassified or something. I mean, it's what they show as successes.
Out in the open.
God of authority. And I have some shredded currency in here. I think Bernard von Nothaus appreciated that.
You have many gods here. This is a many-partite god.
Exactly. I was so proud of my Thomas Kincaid-like painting. Before I cut it into strips, I thought I really nailed it. I'm going to have the little bluebirds and a water fountain, and down here I have swans and a heart shape. There's the Barbara Bush quote. The reporter asked her if she thought much about the body bags and that type of thing. And she said, why should I waste my beautiful mind on those kind of thoughts? And her father-in-law did business with the Nazis, the Prescott Bush, senator, and then of course her husband and son, and instrumental in killing millions of people. And so, well, that would be one reason she could think about it. Anyways, so this is really about that sort of philosophy, just thinking about the beautiful things while being tacitly complicit.